Díobh agus fáte go dtí Podchraoladh Cynthia. You're very welcome to Cynthia's podcast. We yet haven't got a name for the podcast, so we'll just call it Podcast with Cynthia. But I'm delighted to be joined by four dynamic ladies around the table today, and they made their way to the European Parliament in Brussels, courtesy of European Movement Ireland. And I've got Lorna here to tell us more about that. And maybe we'll just start with Lorna, and then I'll introduce the other ladies one by one. Lorna, of course, your surname is Hayes, and you're Deputy CEO of the European Movement Ireland. But what is that, and why did you bring these ladies and other stakeholders of your organisation out to Brussels?
Thanks, Cynthia. So yes, European Movement Ireland, we've been around for a very long time. We were founded in the 1950s. So we really work we really focus on trying to strengthen public participation in the EU. So we do a lot of outreach with the Irish public, produce very kind of simple or explainer content on EU policy. We do advocacy campaigning, but then we also do a lot of work with Irish civil society. So trying to strengthen their access to and participation in policy making in Brussels.
You were ahead of the game, so you were out you were espousing and you were talking about Europe before we joined.
Yeah.
The old EEC.
Exactly, and we played a big part in that campaign, public campaigning to promote and kind of inform people about the EU and why Ireland should join.
And you've got a dynamic membership, I have to say. I mean, the civil society groups that are part of your organisation, amazing, and we're going to start with one of them. Yeah. And that's, of course, Sarah Benson. Sarah, you're Chief Executive Officer with Women's Aid Ireland. People know you. Well, they know you from all the news reports, and they'll know you from being interviewed on behalf of that organisation and from helping so many women around the country, some of whom I met, because I used to be a barrister in family law and dealing with domestic violence situations. But why is it important for you, Sarah, to be here in the European Parliament?
Well, thanks for having us in, and thanks to the European Movement Ireland for bringing us. I know you'd like to think that we would be top of mind across the board, but the actual reality is that organisations like Women's Aid, and our purpose being to prevent and combat domestic violence and also work for gender equality, are often not known to people. And part of our work in terms of raising awareness of the services we provide, but also that system change, that structural change to improve things for the 1 in 3 women in Ireland who suffer domestic violence, but also the women all across Europe, where our peer organisations are working. That's why we participate in meetings like this. This is why you go on the airwaves as well, is
exactly.
That, the minority will actually reach out to specialist services, and the whole of society often still stigmatises victim survivors, doesn't understand things like coercive control. And Europe, to be very honest, it has been the reason I think that Ireland has brought forward strong legislation, strong policy. It didn't happen by accident. The equality agenda and the values of the European Union have definitely, become a part of how Irish government works. They take very seriously things like the Istanbul Convention and the directives that they're asked to sign up to. And we know from various cases in European human rights is that when held to account, Europe is the mechanism often by which we're actually working for marginalised, minoritised people.
I'll come back to you. We could have a whole podcast just on this issue because, quite frankly, as you know as well, ladies around the table, I mean, it's off the charts, the figures in terms of domestic violence in Ireland. Unfortunately, they're, by comparison with other European countries, they're very high. But I want to turn now to Martina, who's on my right-hand side here, Martina Walsh. Now, you're involved in an area that is a hot topic at the moment, and you're policy analyst with Cyber Safe Kids. Tell us a little bit about why it's important for you to be here and what your message is.
Yeah, so I suppose increasingly we're seeing that for us to tackle a problem like online safety and, given the huge nature of this problem and the fact that this online services are so diverse and so wide-ranging and all the rest of it, it's absolutely important that we work with Europe and at the European level to try and put in place a strong regulatory regime and a strong enforcement regime, and that's not something that Ireland can do by itself by any stretch of the
And
imagination.
of course, that regulatory regime, it's quite recent. The Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. Now we have the AI Act. But let's focus just on the one I suppose that's most pertinent to you. That would be the Digital Services Act, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And as a direct result, then Commission Iman, the regulatory authority, was set up in Ireland. Parents are at their wits' end.
Yeah.
Aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why it's so important that this problem isn't put back on parents, which is what a lot of the tech industry would have you believe is the way out of it. No, actually, we really strongly believe that responsibility needs to be placed on the tech companies to make their platform safe.
Yes, we have values in Europe,
exactly.
and when you're dealing with minors, anybody under 18, you do have to apply particular laws for protection.
Yeah, exactly. In recognition of the fact that young people are particularly vulnerable. But I suppose the bigger question is why should that industry alone be allowed to put products out on the market that are not safe for use and certainly not safe for the youngest and the most vulnerable in our society. So we really need to flip the whole way we look at this, I think, and put the burden of proof on them to prove that their products are safe.
Just a question that might arise from some of the viewers. I mean, I think, Sarah, people do know they can contact Women's Aid and Women's Aid Line and Women's Aid Ireland. And as you say, then there's a national body, but then there's obviously the more regional bodies, would you call it that, or local Women's Aid?
Yeah, well, we're a national organisation,
Yes.
but we're not a membership organisation. So
No.
we do have the national free phone helpline, which is 24/7, and that can refer to our own face-to-face services, but also to our amazing colleagues all around the country, which tend to be small, locally based refuges and services.
That's what I wanted to focus on, that people, I think, feel they can contact you and they know how to contact you. How can they become members, or can they become members of CyberSafe Kids, or can they access a hotline, or is that a dedicated different
That's not something
system?
we offer. It's not part of our remit, to be honest. It is one of the things, something like that. There is obviously something called hotline.
There is.
Where you can report
It's a different service.
It is, yeah. And yeah, there are other similar, I suppose, as well. But one of the things we would be calling for is an individual complaints mechanism.
Yes.
And that was part of the Online Health Task Force recommendations, which we would really like to see implemented. And that would be where you would reach out to Commission Iman. They would be in charge of that. So, for example, we're hearing a lot about Australia and the social media ban in place there, but their model there allows for an individual complaints, and the Safety Commissioner in Australia does take complaints from the public and they act on them very quickly, and the platforms act on them very quickly. So we probably do need more in that space for sure.
Yeah, of course, Martina. And I mean, look, people have different opinions about different things, but it's all about making sure that the laws that are in place are actually used, they're utilised, and they're used properly, of course. There has to be oversight and all that. Now, I could spend a whole programme on this topic as well, but I want to bring in my final guest around the table, Louise Lennon. You're very welcome, and you're a policy officer with the Irish Rural Link. Why is it important for you as policy officer to be here in this room with these three ladies, but lots of others who are on the delegation as well, led out by Lorna?
Yeah, so thank you for having us here today, and for EMI as well for inviting us to come. I suppose for Irish Rural Link, like a lot of the challenges we see with our members, the cost of living is still a great issue, energy costs, but also access to services, and that has been a long-standing issue for a lot of communities in rural areas, the closing of different services. Even just last week I had a call from someone who, concerned they had no access to the bus stop passing through the village, and no alternative was put in place. And it's especially challenging for people on low income, for people who don't have access to a car, for older people with disabilities, women, even lone parents, migrants, that they have to pay that extra charge for private transport if they don't have that family support, or and even that relying on other people, it takes away from their independence.
It certainly does. Louise, an awful lot of people were exercised, including me. I don't want to put you on the spot now about Leo Varadkar's remarks recently about, you know, the Dublin economy supporting the rural economy. We're talking about people here now, but you don't need to comment on what he said, but in general, that divide, there should be no divide.
Yeah, and
we're all in this together. You know, we're all supporting one another and paying taxes. Of course, we're paying different amount of taxes because of where we live and what industries are in our area, what businesses.
Yeah, and I think it you know, it just goes back, I suppose, to investment in services in rural areas, but also investment in job creation and employment. And like a lot of the employment in rural areas, you know, as you probably know, are, you know, lower paid, like precarious working hours. You know, they're in the retail or tourism.
Yes, the services. The services industry, yeah.
And a lot even in like community and voluntary organisations.
Correct. Who don't know what their funding is from one cycle to another, from one year to another.
Yeah.
Or whether there's any longevity in the project.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, you know, it doesn't pay full-time, you know, employment. They're relying on CE schemes and TUS and rural social schemes. So, like those schemes are so important for those services. But it is, I suppose, you know, that it was around the taxes, and I suppose that goes back to the income levels, and you know, rural areas do have lower disposable income because they are on a lower salary. So, you know, it would, I suppose, more people in urban areas probably are on the higher tax bracket.
Oh yeah, no, the academic argument is perfect. In fairness to Mr. Varadkar, like the academic argument makes sense. We all know that.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't have the same level of buses or the same level of darts or whatever it is down in County Clare that I represent, or maybe in rural Kerry or whatever.
And that's it. Like a lot of like younger people are leaving, you know, because the jobs aren't available, and that's replicated across Europe. You know, it's not just an Irish problem. Like there's challenges around Europe.
And the last thing we want with the rise of right-wingism, which you're so familiar with, keeping a sharp eye on Europe and how it's moving politically and every other way. But the last thing we want is for communities to be left behind and for divisions to emerge again, for wars. We're seeing far too many wars to emerge again. Look, you're all doing really great work in very diverse areas, but I suppose the one thing that brings you together and what I want to raise now is the importance of Europe. I don't mean just European funding, but I mean the support and the buy-in to Europe and the reach out from others in Europe to you and you to them. Why is Europe important for these groups that are working in civil society, Lorna?
Well, on the practical level, it's really important because of the range, breadth of regulation that comes out of Europe that's so relevant for all civil society sectors and their work. And as Sarah said, often the EU standards are better and they push Ireland along to raise their own standards on a range of human rights issues. Not always. Obviously, the issue of migration, we wouldn't say that. It's the opposite. So it's really important. But for people to feel involved, you know, they have to feel... Europe is so important. But we're seeing in Ireland, like young people, we used to talk a lot about the EU investment in infrastructure in Ireland, everything we gained. But that no longer... Yeah, that no longer resonates with young people.
No.
And they have to feel represented. So they have to feel that they have voice and access and that what they say, what they believe in matters. And all our annual polling we're seeing for young people, it's the cost of living, it's housing. They're scared that AI will take their jobs.
Yes.
A lot of young people are quite, you know, passionate about human rights. So they follow what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon. They want to see the EU take a stand on those sort of issues. And they're not seeing that. So there's, you know, a gap if not just young people, Irish people don't feel that the EU is maybe standing up for its values, its fundamental rights, you know, it's part of the treaties. it's crucial to how the EU was founded. So that's also really important, like the type of Europe that Irish people want as well.
And sometimes we tend to take for granted in Ireland the democracy that we have, the functioning democracy. I mean, I'm sitting in a parliament and 1/3 of the parliamentarians in it are far right, and they're against LGBTQ+, they're against women, they're against people who might be of reduced mobility, disability. They're against all that, and they're making their voice very loudly heard. Do you want to respond to that as to the values of Europe and whether you feel Europe is listening to your organisations?
Do you want me to start?
Whoever wants to.
I mean, we're part of a pan-European network, the Women Against Violence Europe network, and that also includes members who are in Russia and Georgia and Belarus and Armenia, places like that. And I think, on the one hand, Europe is far from perfect as a model, and everything that has just been said is correct. But when you're talking to colleagues who are trying to provide services for violence against women, or other marginalised minorities, or to hold on to reproductive rights in places even outside of Europe, what you see is absolutely terrifying. And I think sometimes we take for granted what democracy is, and I think that the work that Europe can do and needs to accelerate doing with its own members, where democracy is under threat, where civil society, rights being eroded, media rights being eroded, those are strong bellwethers that that things are in serious trouble. But even when you look at other so-called democratic systems outside of Europe, I think Europe, nowhere in the world is perfect, and democracy is in decline. Democracy is, if you look at autocracies and what we kind of consider democracy, the fact that we can come into the Parliament, we can meet with our MEPs, we can meet with our permanent representation, as Irish. I have colleagues, who are trying and struggling to provide services in other European countries where that's not the case. So I think we can also model as Irish and our Irish MEPs, and not take for granted. I mean, outside there's this fantastic big banner, Democracy in Action, and democracy in action is messy and complicated, and democracy means we have people we don't like saying or saying things we don't like, but at the end of the day the values is the core, and I think that has to be fundamentally what we hold on to. Even in terms of security, there's so much around defensive security, but we're also talking about the security for the people within the union and the countries, and that would be women, it would be girls, it's marginalised groups, LGBT ethnic minorities, that's where we really see how this model can be better and a model for the rest of the world.
Exactly, Sarah. And if anybody needs a stark reminder, just look at what one particular leader or president across the pond can do, not just to his own citizens, but to all the citizens of the world. Would you like to pick up on that point, either of the ladies, from what Sarah has said, Louise or Martina, whoever?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would just say,
Martina first,
to kind of echo what you just said there, Europe has definitely its values are driving regulation in the right way, right? And Europe wants to strongly regulate the sector to reflect the values that we hold dear here. And that beyond just protecting children and all the rest of it, and protecting democracy, because the whole how children learn about the world through the internet and social media and all the rest of it, they will be the voters of the future. And if they're if what they're being fed through the algorithms is false narratives and misleading and disinformation, misinformation and misogynistic content, well, those are the adults we're going to create, unfortunately. So, yeah, I mean, as you say, if you look across the pond, you can see a completely different approach, albeit what Donald Trump says in public is quite different to what's going on at state level, where they are trying to regulate this stuff.
Yes.
But he's thrown his weight in behind the tech guys. The tech guys are no friends to our children, and they're no friends to women. But actually, because a lot of what it's peddling in relation to women online, a lot of that misogyny and gender mis and disinformation and all of that is no friend to men actually as well. It's harmful to men. It does not make men's lives happier. It makes men's lives worse, and it affects their ability to form relationships and all of that. And to go on and to have children and all these things that we're told they want to do, and that's Republican voters and all of that. And I'm probably moving a little bit off topic, but
not really.
It's all very, very interrelated actually.
It is all very interrelated. Do you feel your organisation and the people that you represent and work so hard for, do you get a listening ear in Europe? Do you feel that you can reach out to Europe and you can, I want to say get something from it, but what I want support? Are you supported by Europe?
Well, I think some of our members probably feel they can't reach out, but I think that could be an education piece as well. And I suppose there's a responsibility on civil society organisations as well who can reach out and know they can reach out to inform our
and
members.
Also the onus is on the MEP to make sure that they get to meet your members. Make the constituency visit. Yeah.
Exactly.
And include maybe the local reps, whether they're the county councillors or whether they're the senator or the TD in the area.
Yeah, and I think Ireland, like as Sarah said, I think we have that maybe unique position because I think it is easier to reach out to our MEPs and even our local TDs and councillors that they are, I think, more accessible than maybe other jurisdictions and other member states as well.
Can I ask you all, as CEOs or as representatives or policy officers, wherever you want to, whatever title you have, are you still confident that your voice is being heard in national politics now that we've discussed the European landscape? But in national politics, are you being listened to? Lorna, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, we work more directly at EU level, but definitely there's openness. Like the Irish government, the EU is so important for them, and they want the Irish public to have information about the EU, to be involved. So yeah, I would say definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Sarah?
I would say yes, but it's by design, and I think you have to work at it. So as a social change organisation, we have the frontline services, but a huge part of our work is to change our systems and structures. So we have a policy function, we have an advocacy and a campaigning and a public awareness one. We have spent 50 years trying to change laws and influence, so we've kind of carved out that profile. A lot of the local service I mentioned, they don't have, and that's funded through fundraising. You never get funded to lobby or to advocate, so to commission strategic research, things like that. So over the years, we have been in a position to do that. And so we often are top of mind. And I would say we're privileged to have access. That privilege brings with it real responsibilities, and a lot of that is around survivor voices and making sure lived experience is brought in, and also knowing that there are colleagues out there who I can have conversations with and say, and we were talking about the rural example, and we were chatting earlier about this, is like of colleagues who are running services in rural communities, and if we're doing a submission or if we have an opportunity to go to a joint Oireachtas committee, is to pick up the phone and say, this is what we're thinking. Is there anything you would add that we're not thinking of here? So there is a responsibility when you get into that space to try and make sure that you're representing your constituency, for want of a better word.
Yes.
I will say then that we can influence laws. Then the task is the implementation of those laws. And I will still say that, since COVID in particular, this specific issue we work on, which is domestic violence at a domestic level, has... there's unlocked a conversation and a willingness at political level, which certainly was unprecedented. And I've worked 25 years in domestic and sexual violence, and there were days where there was just tumbleweed or nobody's picking up the phone. So things have changed.
Good.
But I think that's also fragile.
Yes, it is.
You have to.
And it's implementation. It has to trickle down to your service users.
Yeah. You have to see the systemic change. You have to see there's lots of plans and research and recommendations and strategies. And now we need to see them bedded into the systems.
Action stations. Do you want to talk about action? Are you being listened to? Are your service users being listened to?
I don't know. Some days you go in and you think you're banging your head against a brick wall. But I think, there is engagement, and we're Irish Rural Link are part of the one of 17 organisations on the community and voluntary pillar. So we have social dialogue, part of the social dialogue. So we do have some bilateral with some departments. But then I suppose as Irish Rural Link, we have we try and represent. We sit on like monitoring committees or steering groups for different strategies and bringing that rural voice. But again, there's a responsibility on us as well to reach out to our members to make sure we're bringing the right and bringing that lived experience to the table, I suppose. But as like for a lot of our members, like especially community and voluntary organisations, Meals on Wheels groups, it's sometimes, and even the transport, like we're 35 years this year, and it was an issue back then. It's still an issue.
Some things just never improve.
Whereas when you see broadband, we had started a campaign back in 2007, I think, a postcard campaign, and there was a picture of a guy or something sitting in the middle of a field on a computer or something, and it was
in between herding sheep or something.
But like we see that has progressed, and we're nearly every household and business in Ireland has fibre broadband now. So I think there's that political will as well needs to be there.
Good. Tough times though for people on the ground. I mean, everybody. Obviously, it's tough on parents in the space that you're working in. I get that, Martina, and obviously domestic violence, but very tough for people subject to that. But the crisis, the cost of living crisis, it's very pernicious, isn't it? Particularly for people of disability, particularly vulnerable people, people of very poor educational backgrounds, migrant backgrounds, all of that. Are you being listened to? Will you come again? The door is open, but
no, absolutely.
Do you feel that you'll be listened to and that you will get some benefit?
Yeah, I mean, in Ireland, domestically, I think we are often called into Oireachtas committee meetings.
You are, that's right.
And we have had conversations with MEPs, and this has been a fruitful couple of days, I guess. And we do definitely feel that the topic is on people's minds and that they are very concerned about it. I'd probably echo what Sarah said there. The proof's in the pudding when it comes to implementation and enforcement and things like that. There's always more to be done there. And another thing I'm encouraged by, the couple of days we've been here, is we've heard that there's an intention to speed up how quickly legislation can pass.
It's called omnibusing it.
Yes. So
reducing red tape.
Yeah. So we hope, obviously, that the reduction of red tape won't involve the watering down of important legislation and regulation as it comes to
No, it won't.
children,
Standards remain.
or anything to do with our values, let's say. But would welcome anything which speeds up the entire the process.
Absolutely. Because one size doesn't fit all. And unfortunately, we've over-regulated. That's one thing I've found out. Over-regulation, it's just run rampant, and we now need to consolidate it, not reduce standards. You're quite right. Well, ladies, I wish we had more time, but we don't. I want to say a particular thanks to Lorna, who's Deputy CEO and Head of Policy and Research at EMI, European Movement Ireland, who has hosted these ladies and a number of other gentlemen and ladies as well. Sarah Benson, CEO of Women's Aid Ireland. We have Martina Walsh here, Policy Analyst with CyberSafe Kids. And we have Louise Lennon, Policy Officer with Irish Rural Link. So I wish you the very best of luck. Gura míle maith as teacht. And until the next podcast, we'll try and think of a name for it in the meantime. Slán go fóill, gura míle maith.